Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Teaching Small Groups at a Distance. I'm Haley Diaz, your host for today's event. And before the presentation, let's just knock out a few logistics. Today's presentation will be recorded and it will be distributed to all attendees within the next 24 hours. Two, there are a couple Zoom features that we'll be using today and would love your participation in them. The Q&A feature is for any questions you might have for our presenter, Dan, today. I will see those and share them with him during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation so he can answer those. And if we don't get to your individual question, Dan will make sure to follow up with you after the session. And the chat feature is just for general inquiries. Feel free to post anything in there you would like to share with the whole group. And finally, we'd love to get social with today's event. We'll be tweeting today using the hashtag that's on the bottom of the screen, hashtag #LunchWithLeo. To follow along and participate, search for the hashtag in the search bar of Twitter, and then click on latest. We believe we learn best as a community, so always happy to hear from others. So all right then, that's enough from me. Let's get to the main event. Our presenter today is Dan Thompson. Always an educator, Dan has transitioned from teaching high school to focusing on instructional design and educational technology in higher education for the last decade. Throughout his career, he has assisted faculty in course design and development while also introducing new educational technology in the curriculum to create a learner-centered environment. His background includes leading faculty development efforts at Oklahoma State University Center for Health Sciences and Kent State University College of Pediatric Medicine. He holds a Master of Science in Technology Enhanced Learning and a Bachelor of Science in Adolescent and Young Adult Education from the University of Dayton. And with that, happy to turn things over to Dan.
Well, thanks, Haley. I appreciate the introduction. And I also realized I need to change my bio and get the words like decade of experience. That made me feel old to hear that said aloud. So anyway, we appreciate everyone's attendance today. Thank you for taking time out of your day to be with us for today's session. So we're going to get right to it. So first and foremost, I want everyone to know that I will have a couple co-presenters potentially for today. The gentleman on the screen, Dexter and Fitz, Dexter on the bottom there, always like to come and say hello when we present these webinars from home. And so if you do see them either jumping onto the desk or just flying across the screen, I'll probably just keep on going because I'm used to it at this point, but hopefully for everyone's sake, they do stop by to say hello. Okay, so let's get to the objectives. First and foremost, when we talk about virtual small group learning, there's three things that jumped out to me, and the top of that list is that we just need to know the benefits of using those small groups. If we're going to use small groups, there should obviously be benefits associated with those. We also want to talk about how to engage or make small group sessions engaging in that virtual online environment. And finally, the main goal is that when everyone leaves the session today, that you'll be able to just better equipped to create small group sessions in that online format in a way that's going to engage students, but most importantly, especially in healthcare education, we want to be able to improve student performances. So being focused on that as well. Well, I mean, looking back at the first objective, we talked about benefits of teaching small groups. So let's jump right into that. I'll go through this list somewhat quickly, hopefully. First and foremost, it helps students engage with content. And I'm just really comparing this one-to-one with lecture at this point. And we know that lecture can be pretty passive for students as they're sitting there listening to the sage on the stage speak to them about, about whatever the content of the day is. However, with a small group, that students are able to engage directly with the content as they're engaging with their peers. This is especially important in the virtual environment. Just think, when students are in lecture, they may have some sort of social pressure to appear like they are engaged by, looking like they're looking at the professor, especially in healthcare education. Hopefully they're professional enough at this point to focus in on what you're saying, or at least pretend like they are. And the same, they want to not look unprofessional in front of their peers. When folks are studying at home, like you all are right now, you may be checking social media, emails, having a little lunch with Leo. I don't know, because there's no social element where I can gauge your interest in what I'm talking about. So with this, this helps. So I don't know if you're engaged or not. This method will help students be engaged. It's a safe place to share ideas for students. Students are more comfortable in those small groups sharing ideas with 3 or 4 peers, as opposed to 120 peers and in front of you, the faculty member, so that when they are safe, feel like they're safe in that environment, then they will be more willing to actually share those ideas. We also learn by teaching others. I know this when I taught high school. I learned way more about history teaching 10th graders social studies because I had to prepare to teach them. I had to prepare to be able to explain things to them in multiple ways and also prepare for their questions as well. And when I was in undergrad and grad school and taking all these history courses, I honestly didn't learn as much as even using the old textbooks for my 10th graders, just because there is that social element involved there. Communication skills speaks for itself. Students talking to students, and then of course we have the self-directed learning skills and self-assessment. I kind of think those go hand in hand because they fall into that bubble of lifelong learners, which in healthcare education we're really focused on creating students that are going to work in the healthcare field and want to continually grow in their field. And it goes back to teaching methods like this where they start to learn how to be self-directed when they're going through new content, or be able to self-assess their own knowledge and be more aware of their own knowledge, so that when they go to their group, they're prepared to contribute to their peers. Or if they're sharing and being the voice of their group, they're prepared to do that appropriately as well. Of course, there's peer assessment, and this goes a couple ways. If you're doing the evaluating as a peer, you're engaging with the content more because you're thinking critically about another peer's work. And so that allows you to be much more thoughtful and engaging with the content at a deeper level, and same as the student receiving that assessment, that you're getting it again more in a safe place from a peer, but then you're also thinking about the content a little bit more in depth. So we can see all of these kind of have that shared element that students it's more engagement with the content, but then also it's more of a self-awareness, self-directed way as well to engage, which is far we're going to serve them far better long-term than passively learning in a lecture setting, whether that's in a physical classroom or watching a video, kind of like you all are right now. I mentioned in the abstract for today that I will talk about common missteps to avoid. One thing with this I always like to avoid is the idea of setting it, forgetting it. Those of you that remember the old like Ron Coe infomercials, the set it and forget it, that doesn't work in education, because you have to have goals, you have to have instruction, you have to have follow through with your students. So don't just think because you have a really great teaching method that you're going to use that is peer reviewed to say this works really well and students learn and retain and participate. It still needs to be nurtured throughout. So never set it and forget it. Always be listening, communicating with your students, and evolving with your teaching method, even within the same session. Okay, so this is pretty quick and easy. Grouping students. We want to group students in advance of class sessions without the physical setting anymore, where we can just say, okay, guys, get in your groups. And they would just go disperse and find some group mates to work with. Now we have to do that in advance. Whether you're setting this up in like a Zoom breakout room, which is really popular these days, or using, and Leo can actually help you do that, can help you randomize and create your groups that you can then put into Zoom breakout rooms. Zoom rooms actually takes a CSV import, which we can export our files out as. And so it's just something that needs to be done with a little bit of preparation to make the class session go more smoothly. Small groups equals 4 to 6 students. I actually like I think 4 or 5 max is best. Sometimes when you get to 6 students, it's tough to find a role for everybody, and it's really easy to kind of be that student that's a little quiet and slips through the cracks. One thing to avoid here is a lack of accountability. And in this one, it isn't for you, the faculty, it's for the students. So one easy way to avoid that issue is have pre-established roles in groups. So whether that's the group leader, the voice of the group, the note taker, whatever it is that works best in your groups. We'll talk about a couple teaching methods here in a few moments that naturally has those groups together or as a part of the method. But it's just a great way to where you can avoid the student that talks over the rest of the group, or the student that is really passive and doesn't participate, or kind of rides the coattails of their peers to get that, to get the easy participation points. So again, that's always a great method. And then peer-to-peer feedback. And I'm not just talking about the kind of the old school where you would you'd have your peers, you'd rank your peers within the group. So maybe 1 through 5 for every person in the group who, as far as their participation to the group. or, I'm sure you've seen this before, where you stack rank them, who is the best team member and who's the one that added the least amount, of help to the group. So it's not exactly that. Peer-to-peer feedback can be something, and we have an evaluations in Leo that helps this happen, actually, to where you can give peers feedback based on their performance and the content, their contributions, and give them actual feedback and not just kind of an arbitrary number, but explain why they did well and or what they can improve upon. So it isn't just something that the students can just, kind of like a course evaluation. I'm sure we all have those students that just go like, number 4, like agree all the way down on a Likert scale. And they do the same thing with the peer evaluations, because they don't want to, give a peer, cause a bad score for them. This is something where they can actually give them real like feedback, not tied to a score, and just to help them improve going forward. I mentioned in the last slide that in Leo, you can group your students. Here's an example of that. It's as simple as selecting small groups, how many folks you want in a group, and boom, your groups are made. Don't worry, this isn't the how-to video, so we're not going to get into that. We have plenty of things on our site that can help more with that. Just wanted to provide the visual with the note from the previous slide. Okay, so here's kind of the main part, the main event of the presentation, and it's these teaching methods. So oftentimes when we talk about small group learning and healthcare education, top of my list, case-based learning. And so this is something that I've seen in every med school that I've ever worked in, where we have students that are put into groups and they're given a case. For the sake of this presentation, I'm going to use the same example throughout, and that's the case presentation or a patient presentation as a case. And so we have our students in a group, they're giving a specific presentation, all the lab results that are necessary with the presentation, and then they're required typically to do a differential diagnosis, and then a treatment plan with it. So I'll continually use that throughout. When we're doing the case-based learning, one thing I would recommend, especially in this virtual environment, instead of saying, hey, here's your case, do all the work, and I want a treatment at the end of the next 60 to 90 minutes. Break it up into smaller chunks. So have them go to their breakout rooms for a smaller amount of time, 15, 20 minutes, whatever is sufficient for that timing. And if you really want to break it down into smaller bits, you can actually go, here's the case, read over the case, and come back and explain it to the larger group what your actual case is, just to make sure they're understanding the patient presentation appropriately. And then you can have them break out and do a differential diagnosis. One thing that I always recommend is having them stack rank the diagnosis. So put the one that they think is most likely at the top and on down, and then come back and maybe have a larger group discussion around that as far as what the different types of diagnoses that they've seen among their peers. And then of course go have them do the work, paring down the differential diagnosis to the diagnosis in the next block. One thing to be really strict on with that too is the timing. Especially the students that are in med ed or healthcare ed, they're really great about hitting time limits when we apply them. It's especially important to have it be like a hard and fast time limit though. So you don't want to say, hey guys, I'll see you in 15 minutes. And then 15 minutes is up and you go, oh, take a couple more. Or you have the group that posts in the chat that they need 3 more minutes. Like you want to avoid that, because you're going to have groups that get disengaged because they made the initial time limit. And you're going to have groups that keep asking for more time because they know that you're not going to kind of hold their feet to the fire. But if you say it's 15 minutes, I would even recommend putting a timer up if you can and sharing that, even if it's in your, sharing your screen. I used to do this all the time in the physical classroom, just putting like a YouTube video up. You can find a YouTube video with any timer on it that you want. And just say if it's 15 minutes, put that on the board, let it count down. Same in this virtual environment. Pull up a YouTube video and share your screen. So if they look at the screen share, they can see that the timer is going down. So that'll help them to stay on task. And I'll talk a little bit more about a specific example with case-based learning that I've worked with in the past that's really been helpful for students. Next is Jigsaw. Jigsaw is a really popular teaching method that can be used at all levels. This is a really great method too if you want to get students used to having a specific role assigned to them. This teaching method has a natural way to assign roles to students, so I would always I recommend this for that. So the Jigsaw, if you're unfamiliar with it, and there may even be a little post in the chat. Thank you, Haley. There it is now. If you want to read more, quick shout out to my friend and colleague, Dr. Amber Can, who wrote that article for us. Thanks for sharing. So anyway, the Jigsaw method is essentially that you have a core group of you have your core groups. So students are in the regular group of 4 that you would have made, and they leave their core group and they go to their expert group. And the expert group is going to learn a specific topic within, of the larger topic of the course day. So these students will then, within their expert group, learn the information, and then after a specific amount of time, again, you set the timer for that, they will leave their expert group and go back to their core group. And so now you'll have 4 students in their core group that are experts on one piece of knowledge that no one else has acquired yet because they became the expert on that. And then it's their time to teach their peers in their group the knowledge that they learned, and then piece it all together, hence Jigsaw, to figure out to figure out the whole entire totality of that case. So with the Jigsaw is really great too, because it does help those different personas work together better. The student that is quiet has to speak up. The student that speaks over everyone else has to listen. So it's teaching them some of those communication skills I mentioned a couple slides ago, but it's doing it in just a more organic way and allowing students to learn in those roles and all participate equally. I'm a big fan of that one. So check out that article in the chat there, please. Next is discussion groups. And discussion groups can be done so many different ways. I'm going to talk about one today specifically. Do know that if you do discussion groups, that you do have to have some sort of structure around that. So I'm going to talk about a specific teaching method with it. If you tell students, if you have a topic for the day and just say, go talk about it, and without having some goals, instructions, outcomes expected, it's not going to be a really rich learning method for them. So you need to, again, have structure and goals with it. So the one I want to talk about today is Think Group Share. It's kind of the cousin of Think Pair Share, if you're familiar with that. And if you're not, Think Pair Share is actually quite simple. You pose a question to students, and not like an easy yes, no, but something they have to think about, or one that may even require a little bit of their opinion. And ask them to think about it individually, quietly, for 30 to 60 seconds or so. I wouldn't go more than 60 seconds. Human beings can't be quiet in groups for that long. It's really tough. So after they think about it and develop their personal answer, they then get into their groups. So if you're using like Zoom breakout rooms, you can send them off to their rooms, and they chat about their answers and compare answers and come together with one singular answer for the group. And they come back and they share it in the larger group. And so there's a discussion there. Now, the reason I have the list below here is because they need to be able to share when you have large class sizes in a way beyond just a basic discussion, especially in the virtual environment. I've never tried this, but I couldn't imagine doing a group discussion with 120 students and all the little different videos on the screen. It would be really tough to have an actual clean discussion that was useful. So a lot of times we turn to tech to help facilitate that. So with the list here, you can do it in a Zoom chat. We could even do this right now where I could pose a question to the group, same way, have you think, I don't have breakout rooms set on this meeting. If we had breakout rooms set up, we could send you to your breakout room, have you come back and post it in the chat so we can share that way. So there's always little ways, always, think outside the box with the tech that you're using as a way to use it to facilitate conversation. You can also use discussion boards in Leo. For example, we have discussion boards. Students can actually discuss within their group if they're not meeting live in a video, or you can also just do the whole group discussion board. So there's different ways for students to converse there. You can also use ed tech that's specific for these types of things. So Nearpod and Padlet, and even like audience response below it, all those tools will embed into Leo. So if you want to have students only go to one location to get content, which I highly recommend, it's kind of a big ask on student cognitive load if you don't, if you have them go to all these different websites and ways to get information. There's an article being posted in the chat right now on that as well. So thank you again, Haley. I appreciate that. And so with Nearpod and Padlet, for example, it's based to be kind of like a group shared post-it note board almost. So students can post their ideas. It's essentially the Zoom chat, but in a more visually stimulating way where students can see the different post-it notes. It's easier to follow along, and it's made more for that kind of shared atmosphere. With audience response, depending on the system you use, you may have to do like a multiple choice question with that. So just be mindful that if you're going to have students share and you want to hear unique ideas, you probably want to avoid certain audience response systems and just stick with the Zoom chat, or again, a Nearpod or Padlet type situation. And finally, in a cheaper option than most is Twitter. You can use hashtags. We're doing the hashtag Lunch with Leo right now. With it being about 15, 20 minutes into the presentation, we've probably already had a couple tweets that go out, hopefully. And so you can, when you use the hashtag though, just make sure that you search the hashtag in advance. So you pick one that isn't commonly used, or maybe used for a different purpose. You'd like to have just your information in there for students to follow. You can also use group tweet. I'm not going to go into group tweet and what it is as a product now, but if you're curious about this, I would look it up. And there's ways that you can have like your own kind of private tweet areas if you set it up in a unique way. Finally, on this page, there is team-based learning, TBL to most. I'm not going to talk about it this week at all, though, because it's such a big topic that is actually our Lunch with Leo presentation next week that our colleague Austin Rutledge will be presenting. Of course, we'll hype that at the end. All right, teaching methods continued. Student presentations. If I'm going to go back to the case-based example, students can complete presentations either just written. It's easy to do via PowerPoint. You can have one slide that is dedicated to each idea. So they have to do describe the case on slide 1. Slide 2, their differential diagnosis. Slide 3, their findings on their differential diagnosis. 4, their actual diagnosis. You can prompt them to be very clear how you want those presentations. They can do that during class and upload it to be graded either by peers or by faculty. So as faculty, you can work smart, not hard, and have your students do some peer review on other students' content to save you some time. But it's not just a time saver either. It's a really great way for students to engage with the content more in depth, to think critically about their peers' work. So you get to work smart, not hard, and also do what's best for your students. That kind of seems like a win-win to me there. And you can also do video as well. So students can make video presentations. Zoom, for example, does have free accounts, and you can do group meeting for up to 45 minutes. If you're having students make a 5-minute video, 45 minutes of free time is more than enough. And again, that can be uploaded and evaluated and have feedback provided by you as faculty or maybe your TAs, or it can be peer reviewed as well. Again, this can be done live or recorded. The combined CBL note that I have there is I worked with a faculty member and we did exactly this. We had the CBL, we had students work through the case all the way up to treatment plan, and we would have students present live in class their case, differential diagnosis, everything all the way through. And sometimes we'd have it set up in advance who was going to present, and other times we actually would just call on groups randomly, knowing that they had to prepare like they were going to present that day. And then of course, everyone was required to upload their PowerPoint. So everyone still had to get some work done, even if they didn't have time for them to present. Let's be honest, it's impossible to have 25 groups present in a given class period. But that was just a great way. And one thing that I recommend with that, it's a really great way to close it up. And we'll talk about feedback in a bit here. But as a faculty member, make sure you kind of put a bow on everything at the end. Don't just do the student presentation and say, hey, that was great, thanks, moving on to the next one. But give them give the whole class kind of some feedback on the high points that they hit really well. Finally, for teaching methods, I have the flipped classroom. It's a classic for a reason. It's one of the great ways, if you're new to teaching online, teaching in small groups, any of those, it's a great way to kind of dip your toe in the water when you're trying to do small group learning. For those of you unfamiliar with flipped classroom, you're giving students the lecture part of content in advance of the class meeting session, record a video for them to watch, have a YouTube video that is perfectly good content, have a reading, whatever that content is. And then when they come to class, they're going to apply that content within their groups. And so if for some reason the small group work doesn't go over well, it's a little clunky, or students don't participate all that great, you still have the fallback that they do have the lecture material to review again. And let's just use a recorded video that you make, for example. They can go back and watch that again, and you can provide supplemental information later. And we'll talk a little bit later about reflecting as a faculty member. You can reflect and move on from there. With all these methods, avoid inflexibility. At this point, I always like to quote the great philosopher, Mike Tyson, who said that everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. And sometimes that's how teaching can be, especially with small groups where you have this, and I'm sure you guys have been there. I know I've been there more than a few times, where I've had this great plan. I've walked in the classroom feeling great about myself. And then either the students don't participate, the tech lets me down, something happens to where it just doesn't go as smoothly as I thought. So you always have to be flexible and be willing to pivot and change the direction that you're going with the teaching method. So always be mindful to listen to your students if you can over video. If they have their screens on, read their body language and how they're participating back with you. So just be ready to pivot when necessary. Don't kind of let this sinking ship keep going down. Okay, these last few slides we'll kind of breeze through pretty quickly to get you out of here on time today. This doesn't always have to be expensive. I talked about other types of ed tech that you can use, and the one article that Haley was kind enough to post in the chat most certainly mentions, I think there's 23 different types of programs in there that you can use some of these in different combinations, but you don't have to. You can find ways to do this and without breaking the bank. And one of the primary ways is to lean on your LMS. Have that be your single source of information. So I have the list here. You can have your content, your groups, your discussion, feedback, all of that within your LMS. I know that Leo does all of that. I have, of course, I have a slide on the next page to kind of illustrate that for us. But also remember, Twitter's free. If you want to do a chat, you find the right hashtag, get students involved, you can do that. And it can be an ongoing conversation. The neat thing about Twitter is it's not specifically bound by time. So while you can have this discussion in class, the students can keep that conversation going on after class. And as faculty member, you can just jump in there, search the hashtag whenever you want and see how the conversation's going and provide some insights yourself. And then again, Zoom has the free product. So if you are doing student presentations, for example, Zoom's a great way to do that. They can meet in their groups, record it, and take the file and upload it to be evaluated by you and students. Quick thing to avoid here, make sure you always test that freemium product. Sometimes, like, we have an idea, it's freemium for a reason, that you get enough of the product that it's really cool and you're engaged and like using it. But of course, you're not going to get the whole product for free. And so make sure that you are aware of how the product works from start to finish in the freemium mode, just so that you don't have some hiccups on the day of class. And if you can, practice from both the student and faculty perspective, because sometimes there can be a difference there in the freemium models of certain products as well. Okay, here's the pictures I mentioned from the previous slide when I talked about the single source of information here. In Leo, this is a picture of one of our event pages, or our class session page. And you can see all the necessary information is there. And this is especially helpful in that virtual environment. So students can log in. This is right off of their homepage calendar, and they can go and find the event for that day and have all the information from the materials, the documents that you have there, whether that's a video, image, PowerPoint, whatever, a description of the class. And if this next page is actually the same exact page, I just scrolled down a little bit, but you can have the mapping so they can see all of the learning objectives and what's expected of them that day. You can even embed videos. So if you do the flipped classroom, have a video in advance, this is all within one page. So think about this as you're establishing this virtual, small group teaching method, that to simplify a way for students to get the content from one location is going to make it that much easier for them to participate appropriately. Okay, last couple slides. Feedback is important. Helpful feedback on performance is more important than grades a lot of times when we're talking about students being able to improve their performance and learn from something and move on. This can be done two ways: faculty to student, live in class. You just give a great follow-up. I mentioned in that CBL case before, the faculty member saying that they would give feedback live in class after the students would give their presentation. The great thing with that the students really, really got out of that is that this faculty member would tell students how they would have treated those patients, or if it was a case they'd actually seen in real life, they would tell the students how they treated that patient and what the outcome was. So obviously students are trying to strive to become, to be that physician, and getting that feedback from a physician based on an actual patient was something that students really valued and learned from. You can also make comments in your gradebook. Telling a student they got an 87 is great. Telling a student why they got the 87 is even more important. Tell them what they did right. Tell them what they could do better to make that 100. And then, of course, I'm a big fan of the follow-up video. Follow-up video is just something where to give students feedback in the entire class. Let's say you get 2 or 3 emails from students asking about a certain topic. It's a similar type of email. There's a good chance there's more than those 2 or 3 students wondering this. I know I'm guilty of that myself. I was often the quiet student that didn't want to bug the professor when I probably should have. And so the follow-up video is just something where instead of answering their email via email, just record a quick video, kind of like I'm doing now, maybe a 5-10 minute addendum video to your lecture, and just clarify some points and share it with the whole class though, so they can all get on the same page and have that clarity. It's much more useful for students to have that video and have you speaking to them, especially in this virtual environment, than an email. Plus, let's be honest, we all know that students don't always read the entire email, and some things can get lost in translation with email. And I mean, I don't think we all read our emails top to bottom either, so we can't always expect our students to do to read those emails. And finally, student to student. This can be in group discussion. We've talked about that ad nauseum today. There's different ways to drive that group discussion where they can learn from their peers. And then, of course, actual peer evaluations. I think we have one more article to get posted, and there it is. Man, Haley, you're ahead of me. Thank you. And those peer evaluations are something that students can do in Leo, for example, and you can actually have students in the system score each other and give feedback to each other in a way that's useful, either as groups or in individuals. And that's just another great way for them to learn and retain knowledge. Okay, finishing with this, putting it all together. If I were to go top to bottom with how to do a virtual distance learning teaching method or small group teaching method, I would first and foremost establish my learning objectives and the desired skills you want students to learn. The desired skills part's really important. You know, we talked about in the first actual content slide today about all the benefits of small group learning. And this is where you can decide how you want, what you want students to take from this. Do you want them to become lifelong learners and do some self-directed learning? Do you want them to improve their communication skills? Maybe they're getting prepared to go to their clerkships, and you notice that the students don't communicate one-to-one or in small groups as well as you'd like them to. So remember that when you're selecting your teaching method, that it's not always about the content listed in your learning objectives, but there are skills that you want them to learn as well when you're choosing these. You next want to select just the best small group method to meet the goals and skills you want students to meet. Next, group students. We showed how to do that in Leo quite simply. If you have more questions on that, we can actually help you with tomorrow. We'll have some more information on that. And there's another post in there. Thank you, Haley. And then you want to select the most appropriate ed tech, or don't pick tech just to pick it, but find what is right for you and practice it. 5 is communicate. I wrote it there 4 times for a reason. You can never over communicate with students. Give them the instructions, give them their roles, give them what they can expect of you, tell them exactly what you expect of them, and be really clear throughout that entire process. And then finally, it's go time. Conduct your class session, provide feedback to students, or have students provide it to each other, reteach it if necessary, if they are off a little bit, reassess. We definitely want to make sure you reassess after reteaching something, and then reflect. And the reflect's for you, the faculty member, making sure that it's very seldom that every teaching method is going to be a home run every single time. And so you want to reflect on what you did, what you could do better, and how you can improve it either within that semester or for future semesters. And this is always going to be an evolving thing. So that reflecting part is always really, really important. So with that, I'm done. I appreciate your time today. We do have a couple minutes for questions. So Haley, if maybe we can get to a few questions today. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dan, for that great presentation. We really appreciate it. We do have a couple questions that popped in during the chat during this. So as a reminder, just throw them in there. And the first question to start us off is actually from one of the attendees. And they said, how can you use breakout groups to use Jigsaw during a single lecture session if you assign groups before class? Do students have to be in multiple breakout groups to do this?
That's a great question. So there's a couple ways you could go about that. You could do the multiple breakout sessions with students. That could be a little confusing. This is where being really clear about your instructions and communicating would be important. But you could have your core group breakout group and then your expert groups. That you may even have to switch different. I'd have to check some of the Zoom settings, switch between different Zoom actual meetings. What I would recommend is the easier option would be kind of a hybrid flipped classroom model with this, and have students meet in their expert groups before they come to class. And they can pick the modality if they want to do there's plenty of free ways to meet. They can do a FaceTime or Google Meet or Zoom or whatever it is. And in their expert groups, again, meet there. And then when they come to class, then they're ready to do a single breakout room into their actual core groups where they're informing each other. That's a great question. Thank you.
Thank you for your great answer. And another question that popped in was that you mentioned multiple teaching methods today that I'm interested in using with my class, but I'm not sure my students have learned this way before. How do you go about introducing a specific new teaching method to students?
Oh, that's a great question too. So, and this is especially important when doing it virtually, since we don't have them in front of us to really pivot on the fly as easily. So I would say that transparency is really important. I went back to talked about communication, and having goals and having instructions for students, and then following up. And one big part of that is being transparent with students. So telling them what the teaching method is, telling them why they're using it, or why you're using it, and what their expectations, what the expectations are for you and for them throughout that method will really set them up for success. So that you can still invite questions on the teaching method itself. I wouldn't only stick to content. If they have questions, answer the questions. But one big help for me that I've learned over the years and implemented is to give them instructions and the information on the teaching method in writing. Just easy bullet points. We don't want to overwhelm them with this, but I've seen this a ton of times where a faculty member will be in front of class and explain what students are supposed to do. Students get into their small groups, and the first question that they always ask each other is, what are we supposed to do? So let's avoid that and allow them to get right into the work. And by doing that, once we started transitioning to giving them actual written instructions, or in this case posted in your LMS instructions, students can bypass that confusion and just get right down to the content. Thanks for that. And I think, Haley, we're right up against it, aren't we, with time?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So I was just going to say that concludes our question answer session. If we have any questions, we'll make sure that we reach out to you individually. So feel free to email us. So thanks again, everyone, for attending today's Lunch with Leo webinar, teaching small groups at a distance. We'll definitely make sure to share a recording with you guys in an email. Follow up with anybody if they have any questions.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just a couple housekeeping items before we go. For all of our current DaVinci users, we do have office hours tomorrow from 12 to 1 Eastern time. That's PM, not AM, where it's just a come and go session where you can ask anyone, our DaVinci team. We'll have some folks that are there to staff the office hours. And this week we are focusing on creating and managing small group sets in Leo. So if you have some questions about how to get your groups into, or your students into those small groups, we'll be there to help. Just come with your questions, and we'll help you out to the best of our ability. If you have, if you are on our listserv, you already have this information in your inbox. And if you are not, and you're on our email list, you will get an email later today with that information. And finally, I alluded to this earlier, our next Lunch with Leo webinar is next Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern time, and it's team-based learning in the online classroom, presented by our good friend and colleague, Austin Rutledge, who I'm sure will do a terrific job. So we look forward to seeing you there for that, and we will send more information via email as well. So again, thanks everyone for your time today. We appreciate it, and have a great day.
Thanks, Sean. Really appreciate it. Have a great rest of your Wednesday.